The series begins with Jane, who shares her struggles since she was young, living under the control of her father. She suffers every birthday because her father doesn't even wait for her to make a wish. As soon as the song ends, her annoying little brother blows out the candles before she can make a wish. Her father then says, "In the name of God," and immediately digs the spoon into the cake and starts eating. Jane endured this until her 20th birthday when she celebrated with her female friends. They, of course, let her make a wish, which was to become a writer. 10 years later, Jane is indeed a writer, but an assistant writer who writes all sorts of things. Scripts for series and dramas, advertisements for products, anything. She never says no, hoping to get her big break. After spending 3 consecutive months in the office writing a script for a series, as requested by the head writer she works for, Jane asks the head writer for a leave. The head writer barely knows anything about Jane. We then learn that Jane lives in the city with her younger brother. She comes home to find the house a mess because of her brother. She starts cleaning and doing laundry, thinking he is asleep, until she hears noises and goes to confront him, only to find him with a girl. Shocked, she runs out, but her brother chases after her. She trips and falls, telling him she didn't see anything and that she'll take a walk and come back. He tells her she misunderstood and introduces her to his wife. Jane is stunned and asks who his wife is, calling him an idiot and a failure. She's about to turn 30 and is still single. Her brother then reveals he got married 4 months ago because his girlfriend is pregnant. Their parents arrive, and we see that their father is very concerned about his son's wife. The father insists that they must all live together, but Jane and her brother refuse as they don't get along. Her brother is irresponsible and a failure, but their father says there's no other solution. "It's one house that I bought, so you both have to live in it," their father said, which upset Jane greatly. She went to meet her friends to vent her frustrations. Her friend Yesu, who has a very strong personality, told her, "Jane, you need to take the house for yourself because she has been financially supporting the house ever since her father bought it, while her brother is unemployed and does not work." However, Jane explained that the house is in her brother's name, so there's no solution other than for her to leave the house. Her friends were very angry at her father and his behavior. In the same restaurant where they were sitting, there was a young man arguing with his landlord at another table. The landlord, named Mr. Nam, was accompanied by his friend John. The tenant, Nam's roommate, asked why Nam was canceling the contract in such a rude manner. Nam, who has a strong personality and almost never smiles, replied that they had an agreement. Nam would rent the room at a low price in exchange for the tenant doing some chores around the house, including feeding Nam's cat and taking out the trash. However, the tenant hadn't taken out the trash for 3 days, so Nam had to cancel the contract. Nam and his friend John returned to their small but growing software company. John, frustrated by Nam's difficult personality, told him that no roommate stays with him for more than a month. Nam retorted that his conditions are very simple, but people are disorganized and chaotic. That night, Jane mustered all her courage to tell her father that the house should be hers, but she didn't get the chance because her brother's wife announced that she had done an ultrasound and discovered they were expecting a boy. This delighted their father, who was now willing to spoil his daughter-in-law throughout her pregnancy, further crushing Jane's chances. Jane's friends were heading home, but she didn't want to go back. She suggested to Sue that they go out and have fun instead. Sue asked, "Since when do you want to do that? Aren't you going to see your boyfriend, Kitty Coot?" Jane replied that she wouldn't talk to him anymore because he didn't care about her. However, as soon as she saw Kitty Coot looking innocent, she went with him. Meanwhile, Jane remained sad in her room until her mother came in to comfort her with some food, wishing her a happy birthday. It was her 30th birthday, and her mother, who had been saving money behind her father's back, gave it to Jane, knowing what her daughter would go through. She told Jane that she needed to find another apartment because her brother wouldn't leave the house, and she couldn't stay there and become a servant to her brother's wife, cooking, cleaning, and changing diapers when the baby arrived. Jane sarcastically remarked that her brother should have looked for a job instead of having a baby, questioning how he could support himself, let alone a child. It became clear that Jane's mother was her only support in life. Jane tried to get a loan from the bank to buy her own place, believing that owning was better than renting, but the bank refused because she didn't have a stable job or anything substantial to offer as collateral. With no other choice, she started looking for low-cost rental apartments. The real estate agent showed her the worst apartments in all of Korea, including inhumane places and those under staircases and slums. Meanwhile, Nam was in the office, and during a meeting, John, the company manager, announced that they would work until midnight. Nam, however, said, "God be with you," as he needed to be home by 6 o'clock. Nam's colleague John asked him, "What's the deal? Do you have a wife at home? Will she throw a slipper at you if you're late past 6? We all know you're single and don't even like women." Nam replied, "I need to feed and water my cat." John pulled Nam aside and tried to explain that the cat was interfering with the company's interests. But with his strong charisma, Nam calmly responded, "When my life returns to normal and I have a roommate who can feed my cat, I'll be able to work with you until morning." Because of this, John decided to search for a roommate for Nam for the umpteenth time. Meanwhile, Jane was feeling down and eating ramen on the street when her friend Hua called. She told Jane she found an apartment for just $300, exactly what Jane was looking for. Excited, Jane met Hua at the restaurant where she worked to get the details. It turned out that the apartment was in Nam's building. John, who was friends with San, Hua's boyfriend, had told San about the vacancy. Jane quickly gathered her things from her brother's apartment. Her brother and his wife arrived with a small cake to celebrate her ruined birthday, but Jane didn't care and left. Her brother's wife tried to explain that they didn't mean to force her out, but Jane told her it wasn't about them. She and her brother were just kids who would soon realize the responsibility of having a baby was too much for them. Jane gave her sister-in-law the money she had saved and left for her new apartment, which was in a less respectable area. Upon arriving, she saw the cat that had caused all the trouble. She settled in, feeling happy despite the circumstances. That night, she went out with Sue and told her they had agreed to a 1-week trial with the landlord. Jane showed Sue a picture of everyone at the company, thinking the only woman in the photo, Nam's secretary, was the landlord she would be living with. Jane didn't realize the landlord was actually Nam. Nam returned home to find everything tidy, the cat fed and watered, and he and Jane started communicating through notes and messages left around the house. They didn't meet in person, as Nam left early for work and returned late. When John asked Nam if his new roommate was bothering him, Nam surprisingly said he liked this roommate a lot. John was shocked, as Nam usually didn't like any of his roommates. Nam also assumed his new roommate was a man, not Jane. Jane decided to bring food to Nam at work, hoping to meet him, or her. However, the secretary was the one who came down to receive the food, thanking Jane for the accommodation and saying she'd see her for dinner. The secretary was confused, thinking Jane was a delivery person. As Jane was leaving the company, she accidentally bumped into Nam. She apologized and walked away, not realizing who he was. Nam had been waiting for her because she had said she would bring him food. When he returned to the office, he found that she had left the food and his colleagues were already eating it. On the same day, Jane had an important meeting with her writer and the director they had been training with. To prepare, she changed her hairstyle. That evening, we learned that Jane has a friend who is also training as a director, and they have been working together for 3 years with the senior writer and director. It's clear that Jane has a crush on him because of his charm. Coincidentally, Nam and his team finished some important work and decided to celebrate at the same restaurant. Their manager, John, told them that while they had achieved great success, they hadn't made much money yet and still had debts. However, he emphasized that their success was what mattered most. Jane's friend, the director Young, called her over, and she sensed he wanted to tell her something, perhaps to confess his feelings. Feeling nervous, she asked him to wait for 5 minutes and went outside. Nam was also outside, watching a soccer match. Jane, being a soccer fan, joined him, getting excited when their team scored. She grabbed Nam's shirt in her excitement and apologized, but he said it was fine, and mentioned it was the first time he had seen someone else cheering for that team. They continued watching the match together, with Nam explaining some aspects of the game to her. During their conversation, Jane mentioned that the boy she had liked for 3 years might confess his love to her that night. She was looking at Young, who was sitting nearby, but then she saw a woman approach and hug Young from behind, Realizing he was already in a relationship, Jane felt heartbroken, and Nam noticed everything. Jane left, feeling sad, and waited for the bus. Nam, who was also heading to the bus stop, sat with her. Nam tried to comfort Jane by explaining how such feelings are processed in the human brain, giving her a brief lesson in biology and physics. Despite his strange and seemingly inappropriate comments for someone who had just experienced heartbreak, Jane felt comforted by Nam's words. When the bus arrived, Jane, feeling that they only live once, impulsively kissed Nam before getting on the bus and leaving. Nam was left confused by what had happened. The next day, Nam woke up still thinking about the previous night's events. Meanwhile, Jane went to the supermarket to buy some groceries. As she returned, she took the elevator. While Jane was in the elevator, someone joined her. She looked beside her and realized it was Nam, a coincidence often seen in countless dramas. Both were somewhat disheveled. Nam exited on the 4th floor where his apartment was, while Jane, gathering her courage, returned to her apartment, realizing he might be her neighbor. She quickly entered her apartment and closed the door. To her surprise, Nam was standing behind her, revealing they were living together. Jane called her friend while John contacted San, expressing his concern about placing a woman with their director. San explained that he thought Nam was a woman's name, similar to unisex names like Pat in English. John, understanding the mix-up, asked what they should do. Both Jane and Nam were embarrassed and consulted their friends, but found no solution. Jane eventually apologized to Nam for the surprise kiss, which he dismissed as unexpected, but forgivable. The next day, Jane received a call from the director, informing her that her novel had been accepted for a TV series. However, when she arrived, she discovered that Young, the assistant director, would be directing it. Despite her discomfort working with him, she saw it as a great opportunity. Young frequently requested changes to the script, frustrating Jane. Nevertheless, she worked diligently on the revisions, often cleaning the apartment to clear her mind and come up with new ideas. Nam, meanwhile, received monthly loan statements from the bank and meticulously balanced his budget to manage his mortgage, which would take another 37 years to pay off. Despite cutting down on personal expenses, he never compromised on his cat's needs, treating her like his own daughter. When John asked Nam about his plans for Jane, Nam admitted she was a good tenant and worker, and he had no intention of asking her to leave. Returning home, Nam was surprised to find the apartment sparkling clean. He asked Jane if she was emotionally troubled, and she explained that cleaning helped her cope with sadness, stress, or anxiety. At work, Jane met with Young, the director, and the senior writer she had trained under. The senior writer was critical of Jane's work, insisting on numerous changes. Despite feeling dejected, Jane continued to work hard, with her emotions often manifesting in her obsessive cleaning habits. Nam arrives home and asks Jane if everything is all right and if she's upset. She replies that she's just a bit stressed. The next day, Jane gets into the elevator with a woman who turns out to be Nam's mother. When Nam's mother discovers that a woman is living with her son, she gets very upset and tells Jane that she wanted Nam to get married, not have a woman living with him. Jane feels embarrassed and decides to leave. Nam apologizes to her, but she starts packing her things. Before she leaves, she gets a call from her friend Young, so she heads to the studio. At the studio, Young informs her that all the changes suggested by the senior writer have been accepted, even though they don't fit the story. Jane is very upset and feels defeated. With nowhere else to go, she ends up staying at the studio overnight. A few days later, Jane attends a wedding of a college friend. Coincidentally, Nam and John are also at the same wedding. During the buffet, Jane and her friend Sue sit with their college friends, who start to mock Jane by saying that the shows she worked on are not well known. Jane leaves them and sits outside alone, while Sue gets upset and scolds the girls. Hua follows Jane to check on her, and Sue accidentally bumps into John, who is immediately attracted to her, but she ignores him. John insists that he has seen her before, but she continues to ignore him. The next day, Jane attends a meeting with her show's team and finds the senior writer making many unnecessary changes to the core of the series. Jane gets frustrated and can't hold back. She tells them she regrets all the changes and won't make any more because she believes her original story is complete. This upsets the senior writer, who storms out, even though she was the one meddling with Jane's work and making her feel inferior. That night, Jane sleeps at the studio, but her colleague enters, angry and drunk. He confronts her, claiming he did a lot to get her on the show and tries to assault her. Jane fights back and breaks down, telling him the worst part is having nowhere else to go. She leaves the studio and heads to her brother's apartment, but hearing him and his wife laughing inside makes her feel embarrassed and alone. She wanders the streets until she finds herself outside Nam's place, who happens to be walking nearby. Seeing her distressed, Nam invites her to come inside. Jane reluctantly agrees but refuses to talk about what happened. Nam then suggests an odd idea, asking if she could move back in, and that he would marry her to avoid any awkwardness between them. Jane is shocked and declines. Nam apologizes and suggests she go to her room and rest. Jane sets her alarm for 5 a.m. The next day, Sue heads to her job, where she faces constant verbal harassment from her male co-workers, but remains unfazed. Hua, on the other hand, has her eye on a beautiful sofa that she hopes to buy for her and San's future home. Every day she goes to sit on it, hoping to purchase it someday. Jane wakes up in the evening, realizing she set her alarm for 5 p.m. instead of 5 a.m. Jane realizes it's already evening when Nam returns from work. Hearing her stomach growling with hunger, they sit down to eat together. During the meal, she asks him if he still wants to marry her so she can continue living there. Nam changes the subject, telling her to forget he ever mentioned it. She then asks if he's attracted to her, but he says no and walks away. Jane leaves and meets up with her friends who take her out for the evening. Afterward, she spends the night at Sue's place, who has a meeting the next day. We discover that Nam is also attending the same meeting, explaining his website idea to Sue's company boss. The concept of the site is for people to meet and date, not necessarily to marry, which he almost misrepresents as unimportant, until John clarifies that the goal is for people to get to know each other better before marriage, ensuring compatibility. Meanwhile, Jane heads to the studio to collect her belongings but finds it locked. She messages Young, asking him to send her things. Surprisingly, she receives a call from the senior writer she used to work with, asking to meet. Jane agrees and goes to see her. The senior writer treats Jane with respect, even making her coffee and inviting her to lunch. At the restaurant, Jane finds the writer and the director waiting. They talk to her coldly, minimizing the assault she experienced by saying the attacker was just a foolish young man and not worth pressing charges over. Jane realizes they're trying to avoid any trouble for themselves and erupts in anger, telling them how poorly they treated her and that the attack was not just admiration but a real attempt at assault. She leaves them and tries to comfort herself by hanging out with friends. Sue receives a call from work and has to leave, leaving Jane alone. Jane's mother calls, reminding her that her father's house is always open if she ever feels hopeless. The next day, Nam sends Jane a message informing her that her things are at his place since Young sent them to his address. Jane says goodbye to Sue, telling her she decided to return to her mother's place. She goes to Nam's to collect her things, but hides when she sees him arriving with his mother. After the mother leaves, Jane says goodbye to Nam and heads to the bus station. Just before the bus departs, Nam arrives to give her the script she had left behind. Touched, she runs to him and asks if he wants to marry her. Nam agrees, saying it would help her stay, and asks if she likes him. Jane honestly says no, to which he replies, "Good." She then gets off the bus. Meanwhile, the girls are upset that their friend gave up so easily. We learn that Jane initially wanted to study a different subject, like literature instead of law, and is still trying to discuss it with her father. He gets angry and smashes the table, but she doesn't give up. Despite getting poor grades, she applies to study literature. Eventually, her father comes to Seoul and waits for her outside the college. Eventually, her father accepts the situation. At this point, Jane has returned home with Nam and falls asleep feeling secure for the first time in a while. The next day, they sit down to figure out their plans and how to handle the wedding on a tight budget since Nam is burdened with loans and Jane is unemployed. Jane informs her parents, and she gets a call from her father saying that her parents are coming to Seoul. She tells Nam she will meet them at her brother's house, and he insists on coming with her, which makes her very happy. They prepare together, and Jane coaches Nam on her father's personality and some romantic phrases to say to show that he loves her. Nam is a bit disgusted by the overly romantic lines, but she assures him it won't come to that. At the dinner, everything goes smoothly. Nam follows Jane's instructions and interacts with her father just as she advised. When Jane announces that they are getting married, her foolish brother blurts out, "That quickly? You must be pregnant." Nam immediately retorts, "No, we share the place, but I haven't touched her." Her father is shocked, learning that they live together. He exclaims, "I raised you better than this!" The dinner turns into a chaotic argument. Jane saves the situation by signaling Nam to kneel and apologize, repeating the phrases she had taught him, promising to take care of her and keep her safe. Her father, surprisingly, accepts this apology. Meanwhile, Hua visits the furniture store to see the couch she dreams of buying daily, but finds out it has been sold to a younger colleague who is getting married. This deeply upsets Hua, as she has been with San for 7 years without any proposal. She talks to him about her sadness, and he is with John, who notices the messages and tells San that she likely wanted the couch, hinting that women often don't ask for things directly. The next day, Nam tells Jane he plans to inform his parents about their engagement and asks to take some photos together to send to his mother as proof. They take several pictures, but Nam doesn't smile in any, looking as if he's being forced. Hua, meanwhile, sees her boyfriend San leaving a jewelry store and assumes he bought her an engagement ring, spending the whole day dreaming about the proposal. That evening, San and her friends surprise her with the couch she wanted. Hua, still hopeful about the ring, tells her friend that San might propose tonight. However, when she realizes the surprise was just the couch, she gets upset and scolds him, feeling disappointed like when someone gives a crow to their mother. San gets upset and says he doesn't know how to please her anymore before leaving. Hua spends the evening with her friends, but Sue argues with her, saying that both she and San worked hard to get the couch, which was expensive for him considering he's just starting his career. They argue, and Sue leaves to return to work. Jane reflects on their lives and realizes none of them have achieved their dreams. Sue wanted to be a manager but ended up as a secretary. Hua wanted to be a housewife, but has been in a relationship for 7 years with no marriage. And Jane herself wanted to be a successful writer, but is now marrying Nam, just to have a place to stay, even though she doesn't love him. The next day, Jane gathers her friends Sue and Hua, who are still mad at each other. When she tells them about her engagement, they are thrilled and reconcile. Nam also tells his friends about the engagement, and they are surprised, especially John. That night, Jane and Nam's families meet. Nam's mother warmly welcomes Jane, but his father is stern and clearly has a tense relationship with Nam. Amid the tension, Nam's mother remains calm, as if used to it. Nam's father accuses them of not loving each other, but Jane surprises everyone by saying she is deeply in love with Nam and even makes a heart symbol with her hands. A few days later, both families gather for dinner at a restaurant. It is clear that Jane's mother is unhappy, and Nam's father disapproves of the marriage. When they learn there won't be a wedding ceremony, they insist there must be one, leaving Jane and Nam no choice but to agree to a small wedding. Jane's mother remains silent and distant, but Jane tries to comfort her. Nam's father argues with him, accusing him of wanting a wedding just to show off, not because he is happy for them. Nam meets with his friend John to calculate the wedding costs, which are very high. John suggests that their colleagues at the company might help reduce costs. San, who has been staying at the bar for a few days, also offers to help, as do the girls, who find a simple wedding dress for Jane. Everyone supports them in the wedding preparations. On the wedding day, Jane and Nam get dressed, but the car supposed to take them to the venue doesn't show up. They end up chasing a bus to get to the ceremony. Imagine a bride and groom taking the bus to their wedding. Jane's mother is still against the wedding but leaves a bag with Nam's assistant, asking her to give it to him. But Jin sees it. When she opens it, there's an album with all of Jin's memories. The letter asks her to take care of her daughter, and Jin is moved. She goes to the preparation room and breaks down in tears. At that moment, Nam comes in and gives her a tissue. He tells her that he'll wait for her and she can cry as much as she wants. She feels that he is a good person. Finally, the big moment arrives. They both walk out together, and everyone is very happy for them. They keep taking pictures, and John notices and he's very happy to know that she is Jin's friend. Meanwhile, Sam avoids looking at him. Jin's mom sits with Nam and tells him that she read the letter too, and asks him to take care of her daughter. The wedding ends, and Jin thanks Nam for what he said to her mother because she overheard him. After the wedding, Jin and So go out together. By chance, they see San and John. so immediately pulls her friend to sit with them. However, So and Sam talk harshly to each other, So gets upset and leaves while crying. Sam follows her and she shouts at him, saying all she wanted was for them to get married and that the couch hint was about marriage. He apologizes and comes closer to her, and they leave together. So and John go together, and John asks her how she doesn't remember him. We find out that they met a year ago and he remembered her from then, but she brushes him off, saying she doesn't remember him. He then finds a game, wins a stuffed animal, and gives it to So before she gets into the taxi. He tells her that the angry toy resembles her, and he leaves. The next day, Sam sits with John and tells him that he is not ready for marriage and feels overwhelmed, especially since he just started a small app company and has no money. John promises to find him a good job opportunity. Meanwhile, Jin starts looking for a job, but no one accepts her until she goes to the last cafe. They were looking for someone to serve customers, and the cafe is busy. One of the staff asks Jin to look for Buck, describing him as small, cute, with brown hair, and wearing a pink t-shirt. She thinks it's a small dog and keeps calling for it. Eventually, a guy matching the description notices her. When he asks what she wants, she tells him about the lost dog named Buck. He pretends to look for it with her, not revealing that he is Buck, and takes her phone number just in case. When she returns, the cafe owner tells her that Buck came back on his own and that he doesn't need staff right now. She gets upset and goes to Nam's company, bringing drinks for everyone. The staff is very happy and keeps asking Nam and Jin about their life and marriage. They continue their evening at a restaurant where, coincidentally, So's boss and some colleagues are also dining. As usual, they verbally harass her, and she plays along just to keep her job. Then she sits alone feeling upset, and John tries to comfort her, but she vents all her anger on him. The day ends with Jin being very happy, but Nam is not. He gets annoyed because she came to his company. When he gets home, the cat runs to Jin before him, which irritates him further. He tells her not to forget that their marriage is just on paper and that it's a fake marriage. He doesn't want her to put him in a position where he has to lie, like the situation that day, and he's even annoyed that she changed the cat's name. This breaks Jin's heart and destroys the trust between them. Sam returns home upset and talks to his friend about marriage. Sam says he's under pressure and needs a long time to be ready for marriage. His friend gets very upset. The next day, Jin decides to change the way she deals with Nam. She makes food for herself, but not for him. At that moment, Buck calls her, and since her hands are dirty, she turns on the speaker. He tells her he found the little dog and asks her to come get it. He asks if she is single, and Jin feels this is the perfect opportunity to hurt Nam the way he hurt her, so she says no. Nam gets upset and goes to work while she goes to meet Buck. He takes her to the restaurant and tells the owner he won't work unless she is hired too. She feels very shy, but is shocked to learn that he is Buck. The owner agrees, and Buck takes her on their first delivery. He asks her to ride on the bike behind him, and they deliver the order. By coincidence, the place is right across from Nam's company, where he and his colleagues are having lunch. They see Jin getting off the bike behind Buck, and he even helps her with her helmet as if they are a couple. Nam gets very annoyed and starts looking up Buck's profiles to learn more about him, and his friends also start digging into Buck's background. The next day, Jin is washing dishes at work, but her hair bothers her. Buck acts silly, and she clarifies that when she said she wasn't in a relationship, she meant she's married and they are just colleagues. He doesn't care. She talks to her friends about Buck's behavior, and they tell her he is a creep, and they will confront him. But when they see him, they are charmed by his looks and don't say anything to him. Nam takes his entire team to the same cafe, which is unusual because he rarely treats anyone. He does this out of jealousy. They all order cake and drinks, but when Nam goes to pay, he asks for 7 drinks without straws. Everyone drinks silently, knowing he's very frugal. They joke about how he's the highest paid, but still stingy, and he explains he's saving to pay off a loan. Buck tells him he'll never enjoy life if he keeps saving for the loan, leading to a heated argument between them. Back at the company, Nam announces great news. The big company they were negotiating with agreed to fund them, marking the beginning of their success. John texts San, telling him he'll soon find him a job, and then goes to attend a business dinner where he finds So. She works for the big company. They chat until the managers arrive, and unfortunately they start harassing her, especially the branch manager. John pretends to be on the phone, hinting he's about to punch someone, implying he'd hit the manager bothering so. The manager gets scared, and they finish dinner and leave. So thanks John for what he did. Meanwhile, Jin is sitting at the bus stop waiting for Nam, but he is late. Buck arrives and offers to take her home, and she agrees. John takes So home, and she tells him she does remember meeting him a year ago. John is happy and leaves in a good mood. Back at Jin's place, we learn that Nam saw Buck outside and warned him to stay away from his wife. Buck appears upset. When Nam comes home, he starts investigating Buck's background. Strangely, Nam suspects that Buck might be involved in a kidnapping and murder case because his appearance and age match those of the wanted criminal whose identity is still unknown. Nam tells Jin not to go to work the next day, claiming that she needs to take the cat to the vet. Jin agrees, and Nam contacts her friends to learn more about Buck. The next day, Jin's friends tell Nam that Buck seems odd, and they wonder how a part-time worker can afford such an expensive bike. Nam becomes more suspicious and goes to Buck's restaurant to check things out. Buck acts normally, but when Nam leaves, Jin and her friends arrive at the same restaurant. Nam nearly crashes into Buck's motorcycle but controls himself at the last moment. Buck laughs and says it's good because if he had damaged the bike, he would have to spend 7 years paying it off. However, another motorcycle almost hits Nam, and to avoid it, Nam performs a stunt and falls, getting injured. Meanwhile, John visits San's workplace and offers him a job at his company. San is thrilled and later goes to meet So, who is in the company bathroom overhearing her female colleagues gossiping about her having an affair with the manager. Upset, she meets John and vents her anger on him. John is puzzled by her mood swings and she tells him to sell his company if he wants to be with her to get off her back. San goes to John's company and meets Nam and the team, introducing himself and his skills. He mentions an alarm app he developed, which they recognize but find poorly designed. Nam, being blunt, makes discouraging comments, leaving San feeling crushed. San goes to cry in Hua's arms, who comforts him. Later, Nam calls Jin and asks her to meet him at the bus stop, insisting on seeing her. She's puzzled by his insistence but waits for him at the end of the day. But Nam is late because he's busy with his colleagues who challenge him to solve a Rubik's Cube. Buck arrives and offers Jin a ride. Initially, she refuses, but since it's getting late, she agrees. Nam shows up in a taxi but doesn't find her there. He finds her phone on the ground and takes it. Meanwhile, Jin is sitting with Buck in a quiet place. Suddenly, Buck pulls out a metal key from his motorcycle and approaches Jin. Just in time, Nam arrives, hits Buck, and damages his motorcycle. Nam grabs Jin, and they leave after warning Buck to stay away from her. When they get home, Nam explains everything to Jin, shocking her about Buck. The next day, news spreads about the arrest of the person accused of trespassing and kidnapping. At work, Nam tells his colleagues what he did to Buck, but they inform him that Buck isn't a criminal, but a sweet, kind young man. Nam is stunned because now he has to pay more than $4,000 to repair Buck's motorcycle. When Jin arrives at work and learns the truth, she is shocked to find out Buck is the son of the restaurant owner. Nam and Jin both apologize to Buck, who reveals he knows their marriage is fake. He tells them he was on the bus the day of their wedding and even worked as one of the waiters at the wedding, so he knows they are not really married. A few days later, Jin's friend wakes up feeling upset, and San is teasing her, but when she looks into his eyes, she finds a wedding ring. He laughs and proposes to her, making her cry and embrace him. Meanwhile, John is in despair because of his separation from So. He goes to lunch and stands apart, crying from sadness. By coincidence, So is at the same restaurant and sees him. She can't believe he's crying. When his colleagues call him, she quickly takes him to her car. He tells her he can't sell his company, and she realizes he was seriously considering it for her. She moves closer and agrees to be with him, and they become a couple. Nam sees them but doesn't want to disturb them. The next day, Nam and Jin wake up to a knock on the door. It's Nam's mother, who behaves like any mother-in-law, questioning Jin's cooking skills and making her peel apples. Jin gets a call from her friends and Nam tells her to go meet them. She goes and tells them that San proposed to her and they all celebrate. When Jin returns home, she finds that Nam has changed his hairstyle and she compliments him, saying it looks great. They go grocery shopping together and have a nice time, showing that Jin is starting to really like Nam. The following day, San prepares for his first day at work, with Hua by his side. John struggles with his relationship with So, who sets strict rules for their relationship. She insists they meet in a hotel and not interfere in each other's personal lives. John agrees because he likes her a lot. Nam introduces San to the different departments at work and shows him his office. Back to Jin. Nam's mom calls Jin, and Jin goes to see her. She finds a small family gathering, and Nam's aunt takes a liking to her. When Nam arrives, he is visibly upset and doesn't speak to his father during dinner. Nam tells Jin not to visit his family again and gives her money as compensation for missing work. Jin is offended and calls Nam from her room, demanding a proper apology and more respect for her efforts. She then hangs up, leaving Nam to realize she is upset. The next day, Jin tells Nam that her mom has invited them over in the evening to make kimchi, putting him on the spot. She also tells him she's going to have breakfast with Buck and leaves. Meanwhile, San gets a call from Hwa's mom at work, pressuring him about their wedding date, which stresses him out. Hwa tries to withdraw all the money from her account to give to San for their future, but she finds no money in her account. John and Nam accidentally swap documents, leading John to discover the fake marriage contract between Nam and Jin. John and So realize the truth about Nam and Jin's sham marriage. Nam also discovers John and So's dating contract. Jin meets her friend, who asks if she loves Nam, and Jin admits she does. The next day, Nam visits Jin's family village to help her mom make kimchi, as a gesture for attending his family ceremony. Although Jin's father disapproves, saying it's women's work, Nam insists and helps out. The women tease Nam, and Jin's brother sends photos of Nam working to Jin, who gets upset seeing her husband being bullied. Buck offers to cover Jin's shift so she can visit Nam. Jin prepares to leave and checks on the cat, finding a novel she recognizes. She decides to borrow it for the trip, only to realize it was a gift to Nam. Nam struggles with the kimchi making until Jin arrives, making him happy. When Nam asks why she came, Jin says she was worried about him. Later, Nam joins the men and gets bullied by one guy who makes him drink a lot. Jin's brother and his wife come to Nam's rescue, telling him to run away quickly before they completely embarrass him. Meanwhile, Jin is sitting by the river reading the novel. She sees Nam standing on the other side, waving at her. He runs over to her and they sit together, talking and growing closer. Nam confesses his feelings for her and gets closer, sharing a tender moment until Jin gets a call from her mom, so they head back to the house. In the evening, Jin and Nam bid farewell to their family and are driven to the bus by her brother. They leave with strong feelings for each other, contrasting with San and Hwa's strained relationship. San calls Hwa and tells her they'll attend a party that night. She agrees, and San shares his worries with Nam, expressing his fear of marriage and responsibility. Nam tries to reassure him and asks for advice on how to impress a girl. Nam takes Jin to an amusement park, and she's thrilled to hold his hand. They bump into Hwa at the same place. Nam sees a snail-shaped stuffed toy, Jin's favorite animal, and enters a game to win it. He has to pop balloons with a dart, but fails. Jin takes the next turn, popping all the balloons and winning the toy. Nam feels embarrassed, but gives her the snail, saying he did it for her. He also gives her a gift he had bought. They go to a restaurant for lunch, and Jin opens the gift box to find earrings. She goes to the restroom to put them on and meets a beautiful woman who helps her. Jin thanks her and returns to her table. The woman, realizing it's Jin's table, apologizes and leaves. Nam joins Jin, and they enjoy their meal together. San and Hwa attend a play that mirrors their relationship, and they both break down in tears. John tries to discuss marriage with Sue, but she rejects the idea. John is puzzled until he sees a message on her phone from someone saved as "My Love," saying they had arrived at her place. Sue quickly grabs her phone, and John follows her without her noticing. He discovers that "My Love" is her mom visiting, making him feel embarrassed. Back to San and Hwa, they finally confront each other. San tells Hwa he can't get married right now, and leaves her in tears. Meanwhile, Nam and Jin decide to get closer that night and are very happy together. Nam wakes up early and prepares breakfast for Jin before leaving. She is delighted, despite him having left raw onions. Jin feels happy and heads to work. Bak informs her that someone from a big production company came by and left her a business card. Jin gets upset, remembering what happened with Myung, and throws the card in the trash. However, a woman picks up the card. It's the same woman who helped Jin put on her earrings. This woman, Park, is the executive director who wants Jin to work with her. Park tells Jin that they tried to contact her many times, but her email was inactive. She mentions that Jin had sent them some scripts that the company accepted and wanted her to work with them. Jin explains that she stopped writing, is now married, and has distanced herself from writing. Park advises Jin to think it over and contact her anytime. Meanwhile, Sue's mother plans to return to her village. Sue offers to drive her, but her mother declines. John steps in, introducing himself as Sue's boyfriend and sweetheart. Her mom is delighted, and John offers to drive her home. Sue's mother is pleased with him. However, when John leaves work, he finds Sue waiting for him. She takes him to a quiet place and expresses her annoyance at his behavior with her mother, telling her he was her boyfriend. Sue reveals she doesn't want to get married, sharing that she has issues because she never knew her father and refuses to marry, wanting to live only to take care of her mom. She leaves John, who is left in shock. San meets Hua and tells her he isn't the man she wants, and it will take him at least 5 years before he's ready for marriage. He asks her to find someone else to marry. Hua breaks down, pleading to stay by his side, but he refuses. Her friends comfort her while John and Nam spend time with San, reminding him how John, too, had once been separated from the girl he loved, and met Nam in the same place. John tells San he understands what it's like to be devastated by a breakup. Jin decides to return to writing, continuing the novel she had sent part of to Park's company. The next day she cuts her hair to mark a fresh start and packs her bags to leave the place she shared with San. When San arrives, he tells her to stay and that he'll leave instead, but Jin insists she needs to move away to avoid remembering him. She bids him farewell and leaves, stating she will take his advice and marry someone responsible, unlike him, which leaves San feeling hurt. He feels torn inside. After that, Jin goes to meet Mrs. Park at the company and decides to work with her. Park is delighted, and they go out for dinner and drinks together. Park feels very comfortable with Jin, and shares that she once loved someone deeply and got pregnant, but unfortunately had a miscarriage. Their relationship fell apart, and his family rejected the marriage, leading to their separation. After drinking a lot, they head home together. Meanwhile, Nam keeps calling Jin, but she doesn't answer, making him worried. He goes out for a walk and coincidentally sees her. It becomes clear that Park and Nam know each other. Park is Nam's ex-girlfriend. Jin understands from their conversation that Nam is the person Park was in love with and had a child with. They exchange numbers awkwardly, but Jin hides her broken heart and leaves quietly. When they get home, Nam asks Jin if they can sleep together, but she refuses, and he respects her decision. The next day, Jin goes to the company, but before signing the contract, she asks Park to have dinner with her. During this time, Nam looks through Park's photos, seemingly reminiscing about her. Meanwhile, Sue recalls John's promise to always stand by her and gathers the courage to confront her boss. She tells him that she's worked for him for 3 miserable years, calls him out for his nastiness, demands a public apology, and then leaves. Afterward, she meets John and honestly shares everything with him. John reassures her that he'll always support her. Jin goes to eat with Park and asks her how she would react if she met the person she loved again. Park replies that he no longer loves her, but still holds a special place in her heart. Jin hints that the person Park loves is her husband, shocking Park. At the same time, Nam sees Park's card and talks to Jin about everything. Nam seems confused and still not over Park. Amidst his confusion, he receives a call from Myung and goes to meet him. Myung, thinking Nam knows what he did to Jin, slips up and offers compensation to Jin if she drops the case against him. Nam recalls Jin's distressed state when she came to him before their marriage, gets furious, grabs Myung by the collar and demands he tell him everything before he commits a crime. Meanwhile, Park and Jin argue about their love for Nam. Afterward, Park's driver informs her that there's a problem with Jin's case because Myung was severely beaten by her husband, Nam. That night, Sue and her team have dinner together. The annoying boss mocks her, but then apologizes in front of everyone, making them suspect something inappropriate happened between them. Furious, Sue follows him to his building, punches him in the elevator, and leaves, feeling slightly avenged with 2 colleagues from work. The secretary is there, so he tries to take her and leave, but she is happy. Then we see Nam going to meet Park at her company. He asks her to look after Jin and give her a chance as a writer. Park is surprised by this, realizing that he loves Jin. She tells him not to lose her like he lost her, Park, before. Meanwhile, Jin is sitting with Nam's father, who tells her that Nam needs to have children. He gives her a credit card with a large amount of money, saying it's for Nam to pay off the house loan. She tells him he should give it to Nam, but her father-in-law says Nam refused it, even though his father promised to pay the loan if he got married. She refuses the money and tells him something unknown. He leaves happy. When she goes home, Nam is waiting to confess his love to her, but she shocks him by saying she wants a divorce. When he asks why, she says the company will provide her with housing, and she doesn't want to burden him anymore. He doesn't argue, and tells her they'll get divorced tomorrow. Later, she calls him from her room crying and asks what marriage means to him. He realizes her heart is broken. The next day, he tells his family they're getting divorced. His father is very upset and asks him to hold on to her, but Nam says his heart is broken because he truly loved her. Then Jin goes to sit with Park, who finds out about the divorce and feels guilty, but Jin reassures her that it's her own decision and not Park's fault. We return to Sue, who goes to spend the holiday with her mother and asks her to come live with her. The mother refuses, telling her daughter to live her own life and stop seeing her as an obstacle. Sue is very upset, clearly feeling guilty about an accident her mother had in the past. When Sue returns, she spends time with Jin, but then receives a message from John saying that Nam is drunk. Jin immediately goes to take him home. John sits with Jin and tries to hint that Nam loves her. Meanwhile, San is thinking about Hua and wants to message her but can't bring himself to do it, so he messages John instead. John, overwhelmed by both Nam's situation and San's emptiness, mistakenly calls Hua. She answers immediately, and they talk like two teenagers. San tells her to stay happy and not to worry about anything. She wants to tell him that her happiness is with him, but she can't. The next day, Nam's mother calls Jin, so she goes to meet her. The mother tries to convince Jin that there are many problems in marriage, but they shouldn't get divorced. However, Jin is determined. When she returns, she sits with Nam, and they finally agree to separate. Both are heartbroken. They sign the papers, and Jin takes her things and bids farewell to Nam, who keeps looking around the house as if she is still there and continues to miss her. Later, Jin gets a call that her sister-in-law is in the hospital. When she arrives, her sister-in-law has given birth to a beautiful baby. Jin's father cries, and her brother is overwhelmed with tears of joy. Jin and her mother stand looking at the baby through the glass. Jin tells her mother that she has decided to get divorced. Her mother tries to convince her otherwise, saying that she and Jin's father married for love, despite everyone being against it. Even though her father was difficult, she couldn't live without him. She says if she had divorced him because of their conflicts, she would have regretted not being by his side for the rest of her life. Jin's mother goes to comfort her husband, who lies on her lap like a child as soon as he sees her, transforming from a strict man to a small child. Jin understands what her mother meant and starts to reconsider her decision. Meanwhile, not on his family. We see John at the company, where he meets Sue's annoying boss. He asks to speak to him in private. At that moment, Sue arrives on a motorcycle. John tells the boss that Sue is his girlfriend, but they continue to bully him, and the boss leaves. John and Sue then go to buy some samples because Sue has decided to create her own website for her own business. When she asks him if they can stay together, John is ecstatic. At the same time, Sam sells everything in the small apartment he was staying in. Nam also puts his apartment up for sale. People come to see it, and they enter the room where Jin used to sleep. One woman notices a paper under the bed, picks it up without meaning to, and puts it on the bed before leaving. After everyone leaves, Nam keeps seeing Jin everywhere in the apartment because he still misses her. Because of this, he enters her room, notices the note, opens it, and finds out that Jin wrote it the night before she left. In it, she says goodbye and that she spent the happiest days of her life with him. Nam becomes even more heartbroken and falls into a state of depression. Meanwhile, Jin and her friends travel to relax and change their environment. Nam sells his house and decides to buy a small place to live in. John tells him the new house is too small, but Nam responds that he only needs enough to eat and drink until he dies, showing how hopeless he has become after Jin left him. After finishing her things, Jin returns to Seoul and goes to Nam's house, only to find out he sold it. Feeling desperate, she goes to her friend's house and contacts Sue after learning that Nam moved back to his old place. Jin goes to the old house and finds Nam sleeping there. She lies down next to him, deciding to return to him. Nam thinks he's dreaming and starts crying, telling her he loves her and that he doesn't want to wake up from this dream. She tells him she loves him too. The next morning, Nam wakes up thinking it was all a dream, but then he sees Jin next to him. She says, "Let's have breakfast." He can't believe it. She asks, "Don't you want me to have breakfast with you? If not, I can leave." He gets upset and tells her off for staying away all this time without even a single call to check on him. They reconcile and decide to stay together. At the same time, Sam's colleague, the secretary, proposes to him, but he refuses, saying he can't forget Hua. She warns him that she heard Hua is engaged and getting married. The next day at work, John informs Nam that Hua is signing a marriage contract and getting married. He says Hua invited him, and when he sees her outside the company, he runs out, devastated. He chases after her car to apologize and ask her to come back to him, but fails. He cries and tells her he will never leave her and wants another chance. She is happy and tells him she will never leave him. Sam then learns that Hua was never getting married. It was all a setup by Nam and Jin to bring them back together. Hua agrees to live with Sam at his family's house, making him very happy. 3 years later, Sue has successfully started her own business and John stays by her side. One day she suddenly tells him she wants to marry him. He is overjoyed, and they decide to get married. Nam and Jin also get married and live together. Jin becomes a famous writer and the series ends. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed our recap, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out more recaps on our channel. Take care.